Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that your name be glorified in all that we do. We ask that we may love you. We ask that we may honor you. We ask that we may serve you as we understand more about who you truly are. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, here it is, the 7th of February, and it is Tuesday of the 5th week of Ordinary Time. And as I talked yesterday about a little bit of background of Genesis. Now, what we're looking at, this is from the first chapter of Genesis, and what it is we're looking at creation and how God created a lot of things. I'm sorry. God created all things. I'm sorry. Now, you have to understand something behind the scenes here. And first of all, one of the things that we understand is that God is teaching this through Moses, but Moses is speaking to the people. One of the things that's important to understand is we have to, and St. Paul talks about this, by the way, we have to speak to people in ways that they will understand us. So, for example, one of the things I use a lot here, if you listen to the program, if all of a sudden we transported ourselves or found a way to be transported back to the 16th century and we started to teach what we know now that they didn't know then, they would burn us as witches, because we wouldn't be speaking to the people in the way that they would understand us, so they would understand what we were saying within their context, within what they could appreciate, and it would be really confusing for them. And so in their confusion, they'd say, well, these people must be witches, so let's burn them as witches. That's something that's important to understand. So when we look at the Bible and we look at the book of Genesis, and your first question can be, well, why doesn't God talk about through Moses all the things that we understand in science today? It's because the people wouldn't have understood it. You could have gone to the great scientists in Egypt and they wouldn't understand it. So you hear what I'm saying here. You have to speak to the people in a way they understand this. So the Bible is taught in a way that people will understand what it says. Remember a famous line we can see in the Bible. Jesus arrived at the fullness of time. He arrived at a time that he could speak to the people in ways that they would understand what he had to teach. He couldn't have done that before then. So it was the fullness of time. One of the things that we understand from St. Augustine is he said that when St. John says at the end of his gospel that there is so much information there that there wouldn't be, of what Jesus did and said, there wouldn't be enough books in the world to hold it. What he was actually saying is our understanding as human beings was not at a level that we could comprehend everything. Therefore, that time will come and then we will comprehend it. And so we are always growing in understanding. That's an important part. So one of the things that we see when we see creation described in a way that the people at the time could understand it. We don't get into atoms and molecules. We don't get into, and the Lord caused protons and neutrons and everything to come together because the people wouldn't have understood that. And in order for him to come to a point where he could describe that to the point where people could understand it, well, the Bible would be huge. And so that doesn't happen. What's happening is Moses is explaining the creation of the world in a way that people can understand it and giving them the wisdom that they need to understand at the time. This wisdom is what is key. Now, understand that the worst sin in the Bible, consistently at all times and everywhere, is idolatry. Now, I'm currently reading Dennis Prager's Rational Bible series. I'm reading his latest, which is Deuteronomy, and he does a wonderful job. He's written three of them. He's written Genesis, Exodus, and Deuteronomy. I really wish he would do Leviticus, and I know that's eventually coming, but I really wish he would do that. So I'm currently reading Deuteronomy, and he brings out that the whole message of God is he's teaching people wisdom. Idolatry is the worst sin in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the reason why it is such a worst sin is because it literally leads people to devolve as opposed to evolve. That's my words, not anyone else's. And one of the things that he brings out in this teaching is currently we have a form of idolatry that is doing exactly what the Lord will say if you follow it. And that is making, now I have to say this very well, there's nothing wrong with education. Making education an idol, there's nothing wrong with it, but it all has to be in its right place. Nothing wrong with money, but it all has to be in its right place. That's why the love of money is a form of idolatry, but money itself is not. That's from St. Paul. So a lot of people will focus on education as being more important. So they stop going to church. Why? Because education is more important. Dennis Prager brings that out too. That's a form of idolatry. So what the Lord is leading people away from is idolatry in Genesis. We'll talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, right here on WEZE.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. Coming from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. Come visit us on Sundays, 10 o'clock a.m. So anyway, we're talking about this powerful understanding of Genesis. So remember, Moses is writing to the people who have left Egypt. And he is helping them understand that they have been called, they have been chosen by God, who is the one true God. But where are they leaving? They are leaving Egypt, where all this form of worship of other gods was common, because the Jews are really one of the first, if not the first culture to believe in one God. There were other people within those cultures, including the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who I learned recently, fascinating, was King Tut's father. Fascinating. But the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who believed in only one God, he believed that the sun, S-U-N, was the one God. And then, of course, Socrates only believed in one God. And both of those were considered atheists because they only believed in one God. When I studied atheism at Boston College, one of the things they taught is atheism prior to about 200, getting close to 300 years ago. Atheism was not that people didn't believe in God, but they didn't believe in our gods. So in a sense, to the Egyptians, the Jews would be atheists because they only believed in the one God. And here Moses is teaching them the truth about the one God, the principles and teachings of the one God. And at the same time, he's helping them understand that they have been chosen to worship this one God, to be eventually assigned to all the universe that
this God is the true God, and all the other gods are false gods. So the most important message we're hearing is understanding that God created the universe. Why is that important? Because the minute we realize that God created the sun and the moon and the stars and the fish and the sea and everything else, then we understand that there is no sun god, there is no moon god, there is no Poseidon, there is no Saturn, there is no Jupiter, which obviously were Roman gods, but you can get my general idea. There is no, what was her name, Aphrodite, was that it? There are none of these false gods that they were surrounded with in Egypt. Dennis Prager, my sources are not just simply Dennis Prager. I've been a priest for 30 years, so I know this stuff. But he had just writes this excellent series, and he pointed out that the plagues in Exodus were actually targeted. They were actually plagues rooted in the Egyptians' worshiping of the particular god that was represented by the plague, the river god, etc., etc. So we understand that what God is teaching through Moses is all these gods that they were surrounded with in Egypt do not exist. There is one God, and that one God is the God of the Jews. And we also understand that that you will see later, if you read Exodus, that there is a covenant made by this God. We all see the first covenant with Abraham, but this covenant made by this one God with his people to make sure they understand that they are to worship this one God. So that's one of the focuses that we see in Genesis. We'll be back tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation to the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.